than the losing, what's the toughest part when you get into a stretch like this for you guys and for you?
I think just helping our guys stay dedicated to the things that we know matter most. Because let's face it, I think no matter what you're talking about, whether it's basketball or even things outside of sports, sometimes you utilize results to validate your process, and especially with young people. So that's probably been the hardest part.
Speaking of the process, I know once the season ends, you sit down and really evaluate that.
Yes.
Has there been one or two areas this year that have really caused you to pause and think about certain areas of your process and say, man, something's off here?
In terms of the process?
Yeah.
No, not necessarily. I think there's certainly been times and areas where you say we need to do a better job executing our process. But I think, there's a coaching friend of mine who was a longtime college and NBA coach, and he said, if you're doing something out there on the court and you believe in it and it's not working, he said the first thing is to do it harder, and he said the next thing is to do it better, and he said the third thing is to change personnel, and the fourth thing is maybe you need to change what you're doing. And I'm not saying that necessarily is the order all the time, but those first two things, do it harder, do it better, you certainly could apply that. I mean, we could sit down and watch tape from Saturday or from a lot of games, and whatever it is you're doing, I don't care what the scheme is on offense or on defense. If you play extremely hard, you play together, and you have a level of intelligence with how you're doing it, it's going to work better than if you don't have those things.
Is there anything that you thought that you said, hey, I screwed that up, I need to teach this differently or instruct it differently?
Well, I mean, I think, Brian, that when you're evaluating what you're doing, you always have to look at yourself first. You always have to look at things you could have done differently or need to do differently, and we do that, or I do that on a day-to-day basis or a game-to-game basis. I have not done that in terms of the season in its totality, because the season's still going on. But I think there's a lot of different areas that we needed to or need to just create better carryover in, and I certainly, that's something I got to do a better job of.
Do you think there are guys that are maybe in roles that necessarily wouldn't normally have them in, and maybe even freshmen that you've had to rely on maybe more than you would if you had a different roster? I know it's kind of hypothetical, but
No, that's a great question, and the answer is yes. I think one of the things that happens when you lose all five starters, you lose a lot of guys off of a team, is some guys get thrust into some new roles, and some of those guys are freshmen and some of those guys are sophomores, and you hope that they're ready. You do everything you can to try to get them ready for that, but ready is a relative term, and the reality is, I think, some of our guys on our team this year they were asked to do a lot. They've been asked to do a lot, and they've played, maybe more minutes, or definitely more minutes in certain situations, certain games, than they would have if they were in the same position, the same class on a team like last year's team. But that's a reality. I mean, that's any year you have, like I said, a lot of turnover, you're going to have some of that.
When you look at Tech and the fact that they're fighting for their resume, or a Baylor Saturday and seeding, they obviously have a lot to play for. Do you have to convince your guys that you guys still have a lot to play for?
Well, I think the first question is, are you a competitor? Because if you are, then every time you take the floor, particularly in a Big 12 game, but in any game, in any practice, you're trying to compete to win. And that's a culture that we're trying to build in our program where competitiveness is non-negotiable. It's not something that you turn on and off. It's just who we are. It's that we're not to that point yet. We're trying to get to that point. Somebody told me, made a comment the other day to me about, teams that play hard all the time, and they were referring to a team that we coached, a few years ago, and I said, yeah, that's what we're trying to get to. But it has to be something that is pervasive, not just in games, but in anything that you do, any type of competition, whether it's on the court or off. So, in terms of having something to play for, I mean, we got a great opportunity with a Big 12 game, a really good team in Texas Tech. I believe it'll be their senior night, so they're going to be fired up. It'll be a great crowd, and I'll tell you what, I'd love to play.
Shaka, did the shuffling of the coaching staff at the beginning of the year, did that have anything to do in terms of disrupting business as usual?
I don't think so.
In terms of just, the connect between coach and player this year, was there anything different that, looking back, you'd have done something differently?
In terms of the makeup of our staff?
Or just in general, was there a different dynamic this year that kept it from all connecting?
No, I don't think the dynamic was a whole lot different than it was last year. Our personnel, in terms of our team, is different than it was last year. But to your point, at the end of every season, you look at your staff and you evaluate what areas you felt like you did well, what areas you felt like need improvement, and with the season we've had, and I would do this anyway, even if we won every game, but particularly with the season we've had, I think it's very important to evaluate everything and everyone. Nothing is above that, and like I said, I would do that anyway, but there's even a heightened sense of urgency, because we haven't had as good a season as we wanted to have.
Because y'all have been in so many close games, have you even once looked back and said, was dismissing Tevin the right thing? You could use another 15-point score.
Oh, there's no question. I mean, there's been a lot of games where afterwards, that's crossed my mind, but I really didn't have a choice. As I told you guys, it was my decision, but for the long-term growth of our program and where we are trying to get to culture-wise, it was really not much of a choice. And one of the things you try to do in coaching is you try to do the best thing for the young men that you coach, but you're also trying to do the right thing for the program. And most of the time, those things align with each other, but sometimes they don't. And sometimes you got to make a tough call. But yeah, there's no question. There's been games. I mean, he was the only guy that we had with that type of physical and skill makeup. If you look at our team now, it's basically we've got. Truly have guards and bigs. We don't really have anyone that's has really good size that you can play on the perimeter and do the things that he did.
How difficult was that decision? You had both Tevin and Jordan Murphy committed to you at VCU, and you go with Tevin. Was that a tough decision, or?
Well, I'll tell you what, and you can always look back in recruiting and say, I mean, there's guys that turn out to be so good that were, maybe further down on your list, and there's other guys that, they don't really pan out. But I think it's just difficult that it hadn't worked out the way with Tevin that we thought that it could work out. And I mean, basketball-wise, he was really making tremendous progress. But I think obviously we're evaluated on, for the most part, we're evaluated on wins and losses. We're evaluated on, what happens on the court, statistics, and all those sorts of things. But there's a lot of other things that go into what we do that are very, very important. And I'm still responsible for helping these guys grow and develop and move forward as young men. One thing I feel really good about is guys that we've coached in the past, whether it's at VCU or last year's seniors or Isaiah Taylor, once they've moved on from our program, they have really, to a man, felt like there's been a foundation put in place for me to continue my growth and my development on and off the court. I believe that long term that goes into winning as well. Obviously, this year, it hasn't as much short term. But I believe that. The day I stop believing that, I don't think I would be doing this anymore, because I think it's about people and moving people forward. And then if you can get those people to come together and commit to something bigger than themselves, then you really have something.
So just to be clear, are you saying that he is not returning, he will be given a release?
He will be, yes.
Be given a release?
Mm-hmm.
Or return?
What's that?
He will be given a release? Or
Yes. Yeah.
On the recruiting trail, does what's going on at this moment, success-wise, does that affect kind of the questions you get or reactions you get from kids or parents?
We've gotten really, really good reactions, Roger. Now, I think everyone in recruiting, they factor everything in. But I think people are looking to put themselves in a position where they can be successful and be a part of something really good. And, the reactions that we've got is that, hey, you have a young team. There's a bright future there. We see people getting better. So, yeah, that's been really good.
Saturday's senior day for you guys. I want to ask you about Kendall and Shaq. And, both, we talked about before how their role players sort of elevated, and Shaq especially. I think everyone's been really impressed with how he's developed and whatnot. What have you seen from those two guys? And
Yeah.
Have they benefited and you benefited from them being in the program?
Oh, we definitely have benefited. I hope that they've benefited. You have to ask them for sure. One thing that I feel really good about is they're both on track to graduate. So, when we first got here, with several guys, there was some stuff up in the air with that. And they've done a really good job, both of them, putting in the time and the work, and in some cases taking more classes than they necessarily needed to at the current moment, just so they could put themselves in that position. Basketball-wise, they've both contributed quite a bit. They've had some really good moments. They've had some times where we've been able to win some games, whether it was last year or this year, that we would not have won without them. And I think that's really what it's all about. So I feel good about the fact that those guys have grown. One of the things that we do every year is before the senior day or senior night game, we get together as a team and everyone can kind of share how they feel about each of our seniors. And sometimes it can get a little emotional, but it's just something we've been doing for quite a while. I like giving guys the opportunity to express their appreciation, to maybe share a funny story, but just be on the same page about the contributions that those guys have made and how everyone on our team and our program feels about them.
Going back to the competitiveness thing, each player is different, but how much does that matter when you're recruiting guys, and how do you evaluate that? Because you guys only have so many evaluation periods. You only get to see guys in the gym so much. What are some, is it you're talking to people that know them, or when you get them on campus, or you ask them certain things?
Well, it's a really, really good point. And, to be honest with you, I think in recruiting, the system that all of us kind of came up with in recruiting in terms of how it happens is a little bit backwards from the standpoint of see a guy, like a guy, offer a guy, recruit a guy, then get to know him in terms of his makeup and the stuff that you're talking about. So one of the things that I've really tried to encourage our staff to do over the years, and some assistants have been better with this than others, again, because they came up in that certain way of doing things, is developing what we call a profile on who this guy really is, what's inside of him. I really enjoy doing it. It's hard during the season to dedicate as much time as it takes to doing it. Obviously, if you look at NBA teams, they have whole staffs of guys that's what they do. They figure out what's on the inside of this guy. After the season got done last year, I was able to dedicate quite a bit of time to doing that with Dylan. So one of the things I did with Dylan was I called every coach, for the most part, in that league that Tulane played in. And that I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun for me, like just hearing what people say. Typically, if you talk to, especially with high school kids that you're recruiting, if you talk to anyone at that school or that's close there, it's going to be highly positive. So you've got to find, not that there's anything wrong with that, but you got to find the right questions to ask. I try to steal ideas and lines of questioning from the NBA scouts because those guys, again, they're further along with us at figuring out what is a guy's true makeup. The more specific of a question or of a situation that you can look into, instead of a coach saying, hey, this guy's really competitive, it's more about figuring out, well, where was a situation where he demonstrated that or didn't demonstrate it. There's some guys where it jumps off the page and it's really obvious. But the thing that is interesting and challenging is what they're going to do here, particularly playing in big-time Big 12 games. It bears little resemblance to, maybe where they're playing right now. And that's not in any way to take away from that. It's just a big jump. So trying to gauge that and understand where they're going to be first as a freshman, but then moving forward. Like a guy like Jacob Young, he's highly competitive, but he's got a lot of stuff going on in his head that sometimes can maybe constrict him or restrict him a little bit. But he's a guy as you see him play over the course of his career, you'll see competitiveness come out of him if you haven't already. And that's one of the areas where maybe in practice you see certain things that, man, you just want to see that carry over to the game. And I think it will. It's just a matter of when.
In terms of the freshmen, I don't want to get with the cliche about the freshman wall, but with Jared and Andrew specifically, have you noticed any of that, or have you been impressed with the fact that they've powered through this month?
Both. I think both. I noticed it, and I've been impressed with those guys. I mean, they, to the question we talked about earlier with just, roles and what's expected. I mean, we're asking more of those guys than you typically would of freshmen, and I need to get Jared a little bit more of a rest out there because he just gets so gassed, and we need to get him another minute or two here and there. And Andrew's playing quite a lot of minutes as well. So I think they're doing a really good job battling through it. Last year at this time they were both done with their season. So just need to keep working on their development. I think those guys feel good about the progress and how much growth they've made. James and Jacob as well have made a lot of growth, even if it hasn't carried over to the games as much. But it's all about every day trying to take a step.
Shaka, are you shocked that your team hasn't won a game away from Austin this season? And what does that say about the mental toughness, I guess?
Yeah. It's really disappointing. It's interesting, Chip, because I remember being in the locker room after the Michigan game, and that was our first road game. And as you remember, we were up 1, just needed a stop, really. I think the shot clock was off. We just needed to get a stop, and they missed, got the rebound, put it in, and we weren't able to score. But I remember thinking then, man, with a young team and with kind of the challenges that we knew we'd have at different times in the season, that sure was a game that really would have meant quite a lot if you win it, because now that's one that you have in your pocket. You say, hey guys, we went up there and played really, really well defensively and beat a good team on the road. And so since then, there's been a lot of games that we've been in. There's been a lot of games that have been tight, but we just haven't done what we need to do to finish those games. And that's happened some at home too, but particularly on the road. All those games we played one at a time, so it's not like you lost them all at once. But we can go back and watch each one of those games. As I mentioned with the Michigan game, there's particular plays that we just had to be better in that we weren't. We got one more opportunity to play on the road on Wednesday, and that's certainly not going to be an easy one. But that doesn't mean that we don't go after it with everything we have.
2-3 last ones.
Jarrett obviously has developed really well, and now everybody's speculating about his future. But where else do you think the team has improved?
I think a lot of guys have made individual gains, but that they haven't necessarily carried them over all the time. Jarrett's done the best job of carrying that over, probably followed by Andrew. Our sophomores, they've been through, an odyssey. Somebody asked me in one of these before the season, they said, is your season going to go as your sophomores go? It might have been you, Brian, and I thought about that, and I thought that was a really, really valid point. And at that time we had 3 sophomores, and those guys I don't think have had the types of seasons that any of them particularly expected. But with that being said, I do think that Snoop and Eric have made some growth since earlier in the year, where I remember particularly coming home from New York, the 2 games we played there, and those guys, they were just like shell-shocked that, man, I didn't realize it was going to be this hard. And it was something that I anticipated to some extent and tried to work with them on, but obviously we as a group didn't do a good enough job on that, because it really set them back on their heels. As you know, with Eric, it took him quite a while just to even work himself through that and be functional. But I think he's made some growth since then. The biggest challenge now is to battle human nature on the part of those guys, which human nature says, it's going to be better later. Let me kind of get done with it. It's been hard. It's been rough. Let me try to move through this, and then all these good things will happen. I just think, man, this is too fragile of an opportunity when you have a game, this past Saturday against Kansas, or you have a road game in the Big 12 at Texas Tech. You just don't get a whole lot of these, and that's really been my message to these guys, or one of my messages to these guys, is to take advantage of every opportunity you get. So I do think there's been some individual growth and development. Some of it you've seen on the court, some of it you haven't. Beyond that, we've had our moments where we've really done some great things, but just nowhere near consistent enough. And the game is a 40-minute game. We've really, really struggled, Chip, when we've had good moments. The other teams call timeout. It's almost been like clockwork that we have not played very well coming out of those. And I think the root cause of that is just a different psychology than you need to have in terms of how you approach those next 2, 3, 4 minutes. You saw it on Saturday against Kansas. I believe they called timeout when we went up 20-19, and then they went on a run after that.
You talked before about, and this is not a big picture question, but you knew how this season was going to be rough for all things that we know, but did it get this bad?
No.
You expect to be at the bottom of the league and missing the tournament?
No. I mean, again, we've talked about this a lot. I never really project and say, this is exactly where I think we'll be, because there's a lot of things that can be, twists and turns. Obviously you don't anticipate what happened with Tevin's situation. Unfortunately, the last 3 years that I've coached, our team has lost, either leading scorer or arguably our best player midway through the year. And so you just don't really anticipate that type of stuff. I don't like thinking negatively, so you don't know. But no, to answer your question, I didn't anticipate that we would, have record-wise the season we've had. But you still have to work to move forward and be the best you can be.
Last one?
You said human nature for the kids is get it over and it'll get better. Is it human nature for a coach and a staff to fight that?
I think it's human nature for everyone. It might be for you guys too. I don't know. I think it's counterproductive. This is one thing I always believe. Anytime that you are trying to be in any moment other than the one you're in, like right now I'm standing here talking to you guys. Like, so if I'm trying to be somewhere else, that creates a real problem in your mind. So you need to be where you're at. We tell our guys, be where your feet are. So I think for coaches, for players, for me, for anyone else, there's an opportunity today. We have practice, get a chance to work with these guys, get a chance to show some tape, develop. I think about this all the time. I got in coaching because I love basketball. Well, we get to work on basketball today. I love, working with guys and seeing guys grow and develop. I love competing. We get a chance to do that. We get a chance to work towards, going after a game on Wednesday. So, but to your point, I think it's important for everybody to battle that.